Thanks to the team at NGI for inviting me here to speak. So I have spent my life working in public relations, riding various waves of innovation. So initially with the internet, when that was a thing in the late 90s, then with social media, and it seems the latest thing is artificial intelligence. I run a professional advisory firm helping communication teams and agencies. We're based up in Newcastle and we've got an office down in London. And so getting our head around these types of technologies and understanding what they do is right at the forefront of our work. So we've been very early into AI. In fact, I've had a role in the CIPR, Chartered Institute of Public Relations, if you don't know it, as variously as president, and over the last 10 years helping it with a panel specifically looking at these issues. And I guess that's my first point. Artificial intelligence isn't new. It's a technology that was originally invented in the 1950s. It's just exploding right now for a particular reason, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. I do believe, and let's get this out right at the front, it's going to significantly impact our jobs and what we do day to day in two ways. It's going to radically change the way that our organisations work and the publics that they serve through various different channels, completely disintermediate how they work. Similarly, and perhaps bigger in the way than the internet has and social media has. And it's also within the next 5 years, although probably even more bullish than this, is going to change fundamentally how we do our jobs. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. We're already seeing some of those impacts. I firmly believe it's going to take away a layer of jobs at an entry level, and I'll explain that, mainly functional roles. The term artificial intelligence is actually a misnomer. It's bullshit, because it isn't very intelligent, and it's artificial. It's based on a computer technology where an algorithm is used, a piece of software is used to manipulate a data set called a large language model. AI predicts, this is all it does, it predicts words and phrases based on questions you asked it, how you interrogate the data set using something called a prompt. So it's a predictive technology. It isn't actually intelligent. A good place to start exploring this, I think, is what happened in November last year, because that's when it suddenly exploded onto the public sphere and also into our domain as professional communicators. Whether you work in marketing, communications, or public relations, you cannot avoid it. In fact, quick poll: who's using a generative technology like ChatGPT, or who's tried it? Okay, who's using it at the moment in their day job? No one. That's really interesting. It's not going to be long before you're not going to be able to avoid it. And this is one of the points I want to make today. All the major software companies, Sage included, Microsoft, Adobe, Salesforce, are embedding this technology right now into their enterprise applications. And as soon as the next release and the next generation of those technologies become available, we won't be able to avoid it. So the world changed in November 2022, and that date's important because it was when OpenAI, software company in the US, launched to the world ChatGPT. ChatGPT, you've all admitted to using it, is a command line prompt that you can open and use via a browser. That's really important because it's completely democratizing this sphere called artificial intelligence in the way that like Google did to the web before, and as we saw with generations of technology that disintermediated and democratized social forms of media. So the moment where it all changed was when ChatGPT was launched, and the growth of that has been absolutely phenomenal. The appeal is its absolute simplicity. Using a text prompt, you can generate content. You can communicate with the machine as if it has a persona. You can ask it to model, you can ask it to question, you can ask its opinion on various things. It can start to perform some of the tasks of creativity that we do day to day as practitioners. That initial data set that ChatGPT was based upon was called GPT-3. That's 17 gigabytes of books, content from the internet, and Wikipedia content. That was replaced, it was superseded in January, so 4 months later, 3 months later, by a 45 gigabit data set, accelerating the development of the technology even further, and that was called GPT-4. GPT-5 is currently being developed. The language models are being trained. That's going to launch next year. There's an interesting point here that the vendors have stopped boasting about, like OpenAI, have stopped boasting about how large their data sets are because it got into a complete willy-waving exercise. And it's become very secretive and hush-hush all of a sudden. A downside if you use ChatGPT is the data sets were, the machine learning was done and fixed at a moment in time. So GPT-3 in 2020, GPT-4 in 2021. There's an interesting development by Google, which just launched its large language model called Bard. It held back in doing that because it was frightened of launching this monster technology to the internet without safeguards. It was pushed into doing it by OpenAI. And the interesting thing about Bard is it combines Google's knowledge graph of its large language database with the Google search tools. So you're able to access both the large language model that Google has built as well as real-time information for the web. That's going to be completely disruptive when that becomes mainstream to search and will completely change search. So I said there's two aspects. There's there's the aspect of how it will affect your organization and its relationship with its publics, how you market, how you do public relations, and it's how it will affect your day-to-day job. So I'm going to deal with the first one first. In considering the impact of AI on your organization, you're going to have to think from a risk register perspective about issues related to bias, copyright, privacy, the sheer ability for these machines to create content. And that might be complete nonsense for now, but I think as we shift towards an election in the UK and in the US, we're going to start to see these technologies weaponized to pollute the public sphere. As an example of that, one of our early applications was asking ChatGPT to write management profiles, biographies, just as a slight test. And it's pretty good in doing the first paragraph, but after then it completely makes it up and it becomes bullshit. One of my colleagues it had as actually dead. It wrote his obituary rather than an autobiography, and others it just completely made it up. So it's got basic information from Wikipedia and other sources around the web, but that information is not complete, and it works by predicting the words that are likely to follow the words that it has been trained upon. There's a lot of work being done on this in the PR industry. 2020, the CIPR published an ethics guide that foresaw all these issues. You can go and check it out for yourself. And this, I think, gives us our first opportunity as public relations practitioners. If you've got a role reporting into management to help management figure out how it's going to disintermediate and create reputational issues maybe for your organization, it's going to have an impact on social discourse undoubtedly. It's going to have an impact on jobs and the nature of work. I'll come to that shortly. And it's going to have an issue on control and transparency. We're only starting to figure these things out. You cannot create law and have it ready to pull down when technologies like GPT arrive. The same issues as happen with social media, the same issues happen with the internet. Regulation is struggling to keep up, and basic issues like copyright are just way behind. It's a big day yesterday in the European Parliament. The European Parliament's trying to get ahead of this. There was a debate for the first time yesterday on the guardrails it wants to put in place in the European Union. Almost inevitably, the UK will follow that. Although Rishi Sunak has said he wants to take a leadership position there isn't actually any time or space within our current Parliament to debate and put these issues forward. There are private select committees, though, that are looking at these issues. It looks like the first legislation will come out of Brussels. Yesterday it was debating, and it put forward a proposal for various tiers on different applications of AI. So if you're using AI to generate content, that content needs to be labelled. If you, at the other extreme, it wants to ban the use of AI where you're manipulating personal and biometric type data. These all provide us with an opportunity in working with management to help them figure out these issues from a horizon scanning point of view, and that's what a lot of our work is at the moment at Waddington. Let's move on to our day-to-day jobs and think about how AI might impact our work and how it maybe already is in some ways. The optimistic perspective views it as an assistant, a researcher. You've probably heard these terms already. It's almost certainly why Microsoft has branded it its AI assistant Copilot. It's building into the Microsoft platform at the moment. This tool called Copilot that will be launched later in the year as part of Office 365. When that happens, you will not be able to escape this technology at all. It's kind of ironic because Microsoft, if you had a computer in the 90s, Microsoft had this Word type clip art character. Yes, we're of the same generation. Paperclip, which was an assistant that was absolutely crap, but here we are. History is repeating itself. The pessimistic view, I'm glad that landed with at least one person in the spot the generation. The pessimistic view says it will take jobs, and undoubtedly it will eliminate some entry-level jobs, and those jobs will change. If you're an optimist like me, you'll see opportunity and you'll find new ways to deploy what we do. It will enable us to work smarter and more effectively, and it already is doing that. So with GPT-4, you can already, for the cost of $20 a month, ask it to write basic text around, ask it to come up with a comms plan, ask it to scenario plan a certain situation, ask it to write a standard template document for a crisis communication plan. It will spit it out. It's absolutely terrifying the speed with which it does that. Suddenly textbooks and templates and content are irrelevant. One of the things I'm doing part-time is studying for a PhD. And I'm already wondering how the hell I try and keep that relevant because of the pace of this technology is developing. It's really good for ideas generation, for the first draft of anything, but it will make mistakes. It will write nonsense. It's really, really good at editing and summarizing. So there's a lot of talk of generative AI. Actually, reductive AI is equally as impressive, and some of the best examples and the best applications we found are where you give it a document, a speech, 2,000 words, a PDF, and ask it to create a summary, ask it to create a press release, ask it to create a media pitch, ask it to create a blog post, ask it to create 10 tweets. It will spit it out like that, and that's where inevitably there's going to be erosion of jobs. It's very good at evaluation, very good at modelling. There's a lot of work going on in the media and evaluation and reporting communities looking at ways we can use it within public relations to demonstrate our value. It's very good in planning and decision making to help make sense of massive amounts of data and bring those down to size. So, quantitative research where you're doing interviews, where you're doing stakeholder mapping, where you've got vast amounts of data, maybe from interviews, transcriptions, it will make sense of those very, very easily. I want to give a shout out actually. Generative AI gets all the attention. Reductive AI is really one of the most interesting applications, I think. And there's a firm across the river. I don't know if you've come across it. If you haven't, you should. Word Nerds, Pete Dakin's company, who's been at this for 5 years or so. Word in the form of the businesses at the moment for a couple of years, where they'll take customer data from all around an organization based on the crap that people write on Google reviews, Trustpilot, customer records, calls into a data center, and they'll provide you with a single view of that. Spot red flags, spot issues arising. And that's on our own doorstep. They're working with Sainsbury's M&S. They're also working with Sage, handle all the user data for Sage. Just move on, and we consider the impact on jobs a little bit more. There was a study in 2018 by the CIPR. CIPR has done a lot of work in this area, to its credit, looking at the role between public relations and AI, and trying to predict where the impact will be on jobs. And it found that at the time, 12% of a public relations practitioner's total skills could be done by some form of automation tool or AI tool. And it predicted by this year, by 2023, it will be 38%. And to be fair, they've got it about right. It said, though, that the places where I would never go are things like empathy, trust, humour, relationship building, because they can never be automated. That research is going to be revisited later this year, so it'll be interesting where it lands, but there's firmly a higher set of activity based around relationships where we're safe. AI may eliminate some roles, but it almost certainly will create new ones. I've spoken about the potential within management. There's also a need to engage with machines. Now that's happening at a tech level, but it's also happening in the humanities, and the people at the forefront of that, and in a lot of ways, are public relations practitioners, because we have the ability and nuance to be able to understand how to interrogate large amount of data and get these machines to work and deliver tasks optimally. So, maybe prompt engineering. Certainly, if you've got any kids who are in sixth form or doing their GCSEs at the moment, point them in that direction, because that's going to be a huge career opportunity, undoubtedly. Public relations is really crap when it comes to marketing and corporate communications, really bad when it comes to adopting new forms of technology. Just think about the way the internet was disintermediated media, and how slow we were to get our heads around SEO, how slow we were to get to grips with search engine optimization, with social media marketing. New industries emerged alongside public relations that, we could argue have been subsumed or become part of public relations, but certainly the industry has become much bigger. We can't afford to miss out on this one, but the data points aren't that good. There's a study by the USC Annenberg and We Communications earlier this year that said that we were taking the same attitude that we take to the internet and to social media, to this new technology called AI, and that less than 1 1/5 of us was knowledgeable about its application. That data was backed up by an international study in March that reported that only 15% of public relations leaders and corporate communicators use AI frequently, and a quarter said they never would, which terrifies me. So you can decide whether you want to ignore it. You can ignore it for now, undoubtedly, if you want to, but it's going to be absolutely impossible once this technology is embedded within enterprise applications. And that's already happening at Adobe, it's happening at Google. You think of the tools you use, Microsoft, I mentioned, Sage, Salesforce, and others. And once that happens, and that inevitably will be within the next 6 or 12 months, it's going to be a force within the mainstream business environment. Talk a little bit about tools. The explosion in tools, and at the moment it seems like there is a shiny new toy every single day, is completely overwhelming. And that's part of the problem, I think, for practitioners. We don't necessarily we come from a humanities background, we don't come from a technology background, and it's just completely overwhelming to know where to start. We do a lot of work in this area as well, and the first thing we'd ever do within an organization is help it break down its processes, its fundamental workflow, and figure out how we can adapt and use technology to do this. And we've done it in areas from media relations right through to writing basic press release using these new forms of technology. And that's where I suggest you start. Think about what you do in your day job, break it down into tasks, and then experiment with tools like ChatGPT to see how you can adapt it. If you're working in a bigger organization, I'd suggest, and a lot of progressive organizations are doing this, you create an innovation team, a team of individuals to do the same task, to look at different aspects of workflow and how tools could be incorporated into that. I've got a really optimistic view about this because I want to have a career for in the next 10 or 15 years. And we're doing a lot of work in this area. We put together a paper that we're going to publish, actually based on a talk I've been asked to do in Birmingham at the CIPR conference in a couple of weeks, and also this session motivated me to do it. And that paper concludes with 5 things you should be doing, very BuzzFeed style, to start to tackle this area, because that getting started is the hardest thing. The first thing is ignore the shiny new objects, because there is always some new toy, there's some new gadgets. It's complete distraction. If you go onto Twitter, and if you follow me on Twitter, I'm at Wads. I use it less and less these days because I just find it a toxic environment. There's this thing that happens when a new technology emerges, and it happened with crypto. It happened with where growth hackers and people move into a sector and they jump on the latest new thing. Ignore all that bullshit because it's not helpful. Focus on the fundamentals of your own learning and development, and look at the two aspects I set out where AI is going to impact your job, how it's going to affect your organization and its license to operate within the public sphere, whatever that might be, and look at it within the context of your own job, and how it can help you work more smarter and more effectively. The third point is horizon scanning and engagement related to the management point. Already there is a lot of activity from a policy development perspective. I talked about the European Union's work, talked about the UK Parliament work and the select committees that are ongoing there. Look at the regulation that's coming upstream, because sure hell it needs to, and how that might affect your organisation. Because again, as public relations practitioners, if we have a line into of management, we have an assertive challenge to make a case for being part of that. Look at workflow innovation. So the explosion in tools absolutely isn't sustainable. What it does enable you to do though is look at different aspects of your workflow, and at very low cost and at very low risk experiment with different things. As I say, the game changer is going to be when the enterprise software applications build AI and make AI available via their platforms. It will be completely unavoidable. If you work in a large team, I'd urge you to create an innovation group to look at that at scale. And follow a proven methodology to innovation rather than just jumping on the shiniest thing. And the final point is, I've said it many times, I'm hugely optimistic about this. It gives us an opportunity as practitioners to expand our skill set. It gives us another opportunity to assert our role within management. It's my own area of study. But we owe it to ourselves to skill up. And of course, plug for myself, thanks for listening. I've got lots of business cards if you need help in this area, because this is what we do. And watch out for the paper we're going to publish in the next few days exactly about this. In fact, most of this speech is in the paper because thanks to the team at NGI, it motivated me to actually commit and get it down on paper. Have we got time for questions? Yeah, so if you've any burning questions, I'd love to try and answer questions. Otherwise, I'll be around over a glass of wine. Yeah.
I think for me, first of all, I think the thing about it with slow to pick up on these things and sort of get on professionals. I know coming from sort of lower down in like coming across as like lazy for using technology to make your work more efficient. So I think maybe there's something in it coming from the top down. But then another point I was thinking about was when you talk about summarising large pieces of data. And I know I hear people who are using it and they're like, oh, it's come up with a load of crap that isn't actually true. How just cautious about taking what it spits out for granted. So do we know how accurate it is? It's like the one thing that I'm worried about.
Yeah, so two aspects to that. The first one, how do you it's a really good question actually, contextually. How do you avoid looking like you're lazy if you use technology? Get over it. I absolutely don't. And the second one, how bad is what it makes up? So first question, I'd say artificial intelligence was not on the risk register within management. Sorry, if it wasn't on the risk register within management before November 2022, last year, when OpenAI launched, it certainly is now. And you can't go into any organisation and it not be part of a management discussion about, the issues some of the issues you talked about, basically misinformation or risk perspective as a better minimum, let alone consider productivity benefits. So it absolutely is being looked at a management level, I think, and you're going to be shown to be progressive and forward thinking. I think so. Put yourself out there and be brave. I built a career out of riding waves of technology and public relations. So, yeah, you put yourself out there, I'd suggest. Second point, it does make stuff up. And I think we've got to incorporate fact checking into everything that we do. There's a big debate going on, crosses across your 2 points at the moment. Actually, big debate going on within all the research institutions and academic institutions around the UK and in fact globally about what the hell they do about ChatGPT and students and the dissertations that are being written right now. Because undoubtedly, for example, great example, I'm doing a PhD. My area of study for my PhD is the relationship between management and public relations, and I asked, basic question, ChatGPT, show me the issues related to these two areas, and it will create you perfectly, the pros and cons, and it's very, very good at that. It writes it though in a totally synthetic style that you can spot. That will get better, but you've got to fact check. You absolutely have to fact check. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, Steve. That's really, really, really interesting stuff. It's permeating into every part of our daily lives, isn't it? Bit by bit. I was interested about what you mentioned to do with elections coming up, with potential misuse. There's a kind of concept that happens in there, and I think it's something that happens in focus groups where you see opinion shifts towards the kind of the most extreme or the kind of the loudest voice in the room, and then it actually coalesces around that. I know this is sort of wild speculation, but what would you think is going to? How do you think it's going to play out? Is it going to play out in a really? Is it going to be used really aggressively? Is it naturally going to move towards those loudest voices, those more extreme views in what it produces, or is it the way in which people are using it that will do that? Is there something inherently built into it that leads to results like worse sense of use?
I think at the moment, we're still at a fairly nascent level where we're at the stage of being able to use machines to write tons and tons of content, and I think that's what's going to happen. That media, social forms of media, will be absolutely polluted with content related to issues, and we've learnt from Brexit and the last US election, the last election in the UK, that drives the way that they get attention. To your point, is through extremes. I just think it's going to drive further and further polarisation. I can't see any way, to be honest, and that is quite depressing. The other depressing fact is there's so little research been done about this to understand the behaviours. We're only just being able to understand, what happened around discourse on Twitter related to the last elections, to the Ukraine war, and so forth. And an absolute pollution of these channels is you can't see any other way. No, sorry, that's a bit depressing. Can we have an upbeat question? Yeah.
I just wondered if you had any specific thoughts on inclusion.
Yeah, it's a big issue.
Yeah. So I'm Shelley from Innovations Network. So we look a little bit at that issue. We had it at Benchfest where we were considering the issues around homogenised workforce programming, what we call applied human intelligence.
Yeah.
And the impact that has on kind of how people use AI or how open to diverse voices AI is. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's terrifying because you think about all the technologies I've spoken about, they're all developed by middle class, predominantly white men, let's face it, on the west coast of the US. It's another wave of technology disruption that isn't including representative, isn't representative at all now. Hence polarization and all sorts of issues. Now, the legislation that was being discussed yesterday in the European Parliament was exactly to that issue when you were asking machines to make decisions based on on data about people's lives, and they want to stop that immediately. Whether they'll be able to, I don't know. But no, it's not particularly positive there either.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. No. Yeah. Go on.
Just quite a quick one actually, just to your point about being overwhelmed by the amount of noise
Yeah.
that's out there.
Yeah.
If you've got any book or podcast recommendations, to sort of educate yourself.
There's a blog called Wadstock. Do you know what? I go through this like cycles of like hoovering up Substack newsletters, hoovering up content Twitter, and then shutting it all down and reading the FT, and just stripping it all back.
Yeah.
I find the FT's probably about as good as any publication, and then you can go and explore from there. It's terrifying how much bullshit there is.
That's the thing,
It's
you
terrifying.
just don't
Yeah.
really aware of it.
Yeah, and it's only because it's my day job that I, tune into a lot of it. Yeah, sorry.
It was just to be positive, as opposed to thinking we're about to see the launch of Skynet or something. One is a tool to help yourself be more productive at work. And if you use Office 365 and you're using things like Viva Insights or Viva, the other one, I forget what it's called, but they blew my mind when I first used them.
Yeah.
It was telling me what attachments I hadn't read. It was telling me that I had said to someone in an email that I would get back to them and I hadn't. And it was doing all of that sort of consolidation of my crazy 8 hours or whatever. And you are better because of that insight. It's almost like a little helper.
Yeah.
So if it becomes better than that, which it probably will, great. On the actual usage in the sort of media circles, we were encouraging a lot of people to be writers, to be content creators, to be experts, amplifying content, get on LinkedIn, write something. And a lot of the time they would say, what should I write about? What do you think's the plus? And we sort of, right, I have to disseminate that. We've used a startup in California which has an AI built in.
Okay.
And it was basically advising on what was hot right now, what people were asking for, what people were looking for, and you could come back with a package of articles to be suggested, and we A/B tested it. So someone wrote one, someone wrote another based on that intelligence, and that was something like 40% more read, it was something like 70% more shared, and we didn't do a thing. All we did was ask this program, what should, on this topic, what's kind of the angle? And I think, well, that's fascinating. The whole thing is, they are just tools to deploy as opposed to I'm going to be in place. though I might be an app, sure. But, you know, I genuinely think it's that aspect of it is incredible.
The application that blew mine, so I had a similar, everyone has one of those moments. Mine was, if you use, you can use these technologies now, there's a technology called Otter, I don't know if you've heard of that, that'll, you can give it an audio recording and it'll create a transcription, and it will do it lightningly fast. Struggles a little bit with the Geordie accent and the Glaswegian accent, but you can train it and get better. And so, you know, I did a series of 20 interviews, stakeholder interviews, around, you know, a series of reputational issues to an organisation. We tested it on ChatGPT actually, now that it's locked down and private. And the pattern spotting was just same use case, blow my mind away. That it went through these documents and figured out, right, where the interconnections were and where the issues were, where the red flags were, and where the, you know, issues that were maybe were rising a lot were rising. And so yeah, blow mind.
Unrelated but sort of related application, which maybe comms folks you do or don't do. If you do an exhibition, so we went and we did just last week. We were 3 or 4 days in the NEC, and we haven't done it yet, but we're thinking about piloting this other startup, which what you do is you record on a voice all of your sales teams, 1 minute, what did you think about that show? Just off the top of your head, and it will consolidate their views and give you a feedback mechanism and an executive level to report in what everyone thinks about the success or failure. You didn't have to do anything.
Yeah, it's good.
They just 1 minute of their time.
Yeah, it's good.
So it's tools like that which I think are going to be incredible.
I was going to say, let's end there. Go on, one more. Can we, one more? One more? Yeah.
So I'm from the local museum service, which is part of Newcastle Council. I think both can be quite risk averse to the point where ChatGPT doesn't actually work.
It's a bit locked down, yeah.
On our computers. Whatever you think of trust barometers, like museum professionals are still, the public has like quite a high level of trust in them. So do we risk that, or do you say we need to find a way to embrace it using AI? If it turns out a load of rubbish, like how do people still trust those?
That's an amazing question. I don't know. I wouldn't know where to start. I wouldn't know where to start on that, because actually yours is probably one of the roles that is absolutely safe from these new types of technology, because you're there present with having a one-on-one relationship with the public, hence the high level of trust, high touch point. There is a lot of work going on in research, and you know, to use these different tools to, you know, interrogate research literature, you know, doing it myself and so forth. So that's potentially one application. But that, you know, high level of high emotional intelligence and human interaction is probably will never be taken by robots. Don't want to go on a date with a robot, do you? So you're safe. Thank you. Good question. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello?
Yeah, go for it, Ben.
Okay, excellent. I'm not on mute then, I take it.
No.
So my name's Ben, and I'm part of the corporate affairs leadership team at Sage. And firstly, apologies, I'm only here virtually. 2 of my best friends have just had a baby in Manchester, so that's why I'm not with you this evening. And secondly, before we go any further, if you could get your phones out and go to menti.com. We're going to do some polling as we go through it. And finally, why am I virtually with you today? Well, at Sage, we've been experimenting with ChatGPT and thinking about how it will shape our function in the moment right now. As Stephen said, it's a very fast-moving space, but in this slot, I'm going to try and be an optimist, a pragmatist, and not look too far into the future with what we're going to cover here today. But yeah, so these following slides are based on feedback from our colleagues. Apologies if they're a little bit too close to the bone, but this is what we hear from them quite often. So firstly, people already think that they can do your job. After all, it's just a bit of copy, isn't it? It's just hitting send, right? And now with ChatGPT coming along, they think that they can automate your job. But those comments tend to come from people who don't get exactly what corporate affairs do. So if you want to head on to Menti and tell us what is your day-to-day job exactly, when you're sat at your desk or you're out and about, what is it that you're doing? So yeah, the code for Menti is 71412763. So if you start commenting on there, they should appear on the screen. Excellent, great responses coming in so far, so keep them coming in. So what I'm trying to get a picture of here is what exactly, when we're talking about AI automating tasks or anything like that, what actually are those tasks? And we've got a lot of variety in there, particularly like things like simplifying, stakeholder engagement, and other things like that. But hopefully that gives you a bit of a better picture of the people in the room and what we see our role as corporate affairs. Because I believe there is a lot of fear about generative AI because it's been driven by a misunderstanding of the role. So at Sage, we use a simple model to plan and organize our work called Oasis, because the typical problem we found and why people think they can do your job is they think it's just copywriting and tactics, and typically that's when comms is brought into the room when an idea needs activation. So we use the Oasis model to reframe the conversation and make sure we have the right objectives, audience insights and strategy before we put our fingers to the keyboard or we prompt ChatGPT. Oasis is not a revolutionary or a perfect model, but it reframes corporate affairs' role at Sage from activation and tactics and pressing send to being a strategic advisor to the business who ensures we are focused on the right objectives and the right outcomes. So when I mapped the areas of Oasis, which could be human-led versus those which could be generated by AI, most of those tasks are still heavily person-led. There are some where you can get support or maybe even leave it to ChatGPT, but all of them still, are, at least in the near future, are very person-led. And that's before you get to everything else that you posted on the screen, your meetings, your stakeholder engagement, engaging journalists, understanding the business context and media landscape. So I found it really helpful doing this thought experiment and confirmed to me that I think for now ChatGPT is a fantastic co-pilot who will assist you in focusing on strategic initiatives rather than doing tactical asks. But yeah, or in other words, I believe ChatGPT is a tool, but I believe there's a danger in the tool, which we sort of already touched on, that is going to turbocharge information overload, and we're already feeling that. But how do we then use this tool to better further our strategic objectives rather than just blurting out endless content, which is going to be how a lot of people see and use ChatGPT. So there's nothing better than crowdsourcing your presentation. So if you wouldn't mind jumping back on Menti, I'd love to see how you've been using generative AI. Yeah, there's a lot there already on ideas and getting started. exploring, testing, giving me a start, research, yeah. I think there's a lot of overlap with what we've been doing as well. So I wanted to go through the experiments, or some of the experiments we've been trying at Sage. They're very simple, just side of the desk job that our team have been doing. But I thought where better to start how to use ChatGPT than asking ChatGPT itself. It took a few prompts to get to this big table, but it created a long list of what it thought it was capable of doing. And the first 5 or 6 answers all make sense and are definitely things that we've been trying. But when you get to the 7th option, it's become less helpful. It's offered to assist with tasks that it doesn't have the integrations or the capability to really help with. So it's a thanks but no thanks ChatGPT on that one. Next, educational support is very worthwhile and definitely can be used for that. But then it says it can help with news and updates, which was another red flag. Manchester United fans will be pleased to hear that ChatGPT's knowledge ends in September 2021. So it doesn't know yet the score of the FA Cup final or the fact that City have won the treble. But overall, ChatGPT on this task, it understands itself and what it can do to assist comms professionals fairly well. So I've given it a B- on this, with a cautionary label that it doesn't fully understand itself, or when it's incorrect, and can sometimes even give conflicting information between different responses. The next experiment we tried was tone of voice. It's great ChatGPT can create content, but we need it to adopt a particular tone of voice. So first of all, I asked it to summarize the tone of voice of the Daily Mail compared to the Guardian, and it appears to me to have a good grasp of how both the Daily Mail and the Guardian write, at least in theory. But I wanted to see it in practice with a 300-word piece on Trump's presidency. This first piece, I'm sure the Daily Mail wouldn't publish, but that's probably as much to do with me giving it too broad a brief. And I think a key skill that we're all going to have to learn is how to give good prompts to ChatGPT to get the response that's as accurate and as useful as possible. But aside from that, this piece, it sat very much on the fence, and I found this a lot with ChatGPT in general. It likes being on the fence here, and the Guardian's version suffered from a similar level of fence sitting, because I can't imagine the Guardian for a second saying whatever the ultimate verdict on Trump's legacy may be. I think it's very clear what they would think of Trump. However, fences aside, I think this gives us, ChatGPT has given us a real clear change in style with just a couple of clicks, a short prompt to get that. I then asked it to use Sage's tone of voice by uploading our guidelines, which I would summarize as being bold, simple, human, and building trust. The article it wrote, it barely made any changes in simplifying the text, which I've interpreted as it didn't really understand the guidelines and how it should adopt them. However, when I gave it a simpler prompt, just like saying, can you simplify this text for me, it was much more effective at making changes. And it's got another handy feature. After it's written the article, I asked it to explain its changes to me. So it gives you an automatic review so you can assess the decisions it's made and judge whether you like them overall. So on this task and on tone of voice, I've given ChatGPT a C. Capability-wise, I think it's probably too much for ChatGPT right now to properly understand full Bryan guidelines, but it was far more responsive when I gave it shorter instructions. Its ability to make changes, create multiple versions at the click of a button, mean you generate lots of different ideas to cherry pick from. So I think it's definitely got a place in adhering to Bryan guidelines and adopting your organization's tone of voice. Our next experiment, hopefully, isn't a task you're always set with, but I was looking at how can I make meetings easier for myself. So during our most recent monthly corporate affairs team meeting, I felt a bit lazy. And that, what I mean by that is I wanted to experiment and become more efficient. So I used Teams' transcribe feature and fed that into ChatGPT to see if it could give me the minutes and actions that I wanted. Unfortunately, my pursuit of productive laziness wasn't fulfilled, and I'm giving ChatGPT a D on this one. It was able to it had a number of issues. For example, over 10 minutes of content was too much and I had to upload multiple versions. So it didn't really save me time and effort, but it did understand humor, for example. It also had an additional risk. I use taking notes as a way to remain focused in a meeting. So I may well end up losing that if I rely on technology. However, I wouldn't be surprised, particularly with the integrations that are coming, if this score rapidly improves with Microsoft's tech stack. Our fourth experiment was Parlez-vous français? Forgive the accent. But for those of you like me who can't read French, this was the feedback from our French colleagues. Whilst ChatGPT is able to handle different languages, our colleagues in Europe have been testing it against another tool, DeepL.com. Their feedback was that whilst ChatGPT is good, it doesn't match up against a tool that's specifically designed for translation just yet. But for ChatGPT, it can handle not just French, it can handle over 100 different languages. Primarily it's trained on English, but it's capable in a very broad variety of languages, which as an international company for Sage is very useful. On this one, sorry, I've not skipped a slide, there we go. On this one, I felt I couldn't mark ChatGPT lower than my GCSE French score, so I've given it a B+. And with that, I would like to hand over to David, who's been running some more experiments and has been on quite a journey with ChatGPT. So over to you, David.
Thanks, Ben. Are you staying on, or are you disappearing? No, he's gone.
Oh
no, he's back.
in the background.
Can you put my slide up then? In your own time, Ben. Can you put my slide up, mate, please? Thank you.
Well,
It's the final one. I added on at the end.
Okay, sorry, 2 seconds.
No worries.
Go from a different deck.
Bear with us, sorry. So, yeah, hi everyone, I'm David from Sage. I work in corporate affairs with Ben in the same team. And we sort of created a crack team, small group of us, basically guinea pigs to use ChatGPT, see how we could integrate it into our work and if it would help us and use it as a tool. So I'm hoping my slide's going to come up in a minute.
I can't find the deck, I'm sorry, mate.
It's all right, mate, I'll do it myself, don't worry.
Apologies.
Could have just done this in the first place. Okay, so when I was asked to do this, how I've been using it, I obviously asked ChatGPT to summarise what I've been asking it, because I've been asking it loads of stuff. I said, can you give me 5 topics that I've been using you for? And this is what it gave me, which is actually really helpful. I don't know if everyone can see. So the first one was, so I'm responsible for our colleague newsletter, and a lot of the information we put, I'm sure you can all relate to this, a lot of the information we put in there is really lengthy, quite complex, not really suitable for a newsletter. So I chucked all the words in, quite often, well every single piece that I put in there actually. I chuck all the words in and ask it to reduce it to 80 to 100 words or whatever, and it's really good at doing that. I mean, you can't rely on it completely because it misses out a lot of the stuff that you'd want to include in there in sort of that tone of voice, but it's really good at just reducing large volumes of text into very bite-sized pieces. So that's the first one. Second one was, well, it's the same sort of thing really. Yeah, large summaries of information and rephrasing them into, yeah, like I say, smaller, more newsletter-friendly pieces. So that's not really helpful from ChatGPT. It's giving me 2 of the same things. But the third one is requesting information on various topics or questions. So instead of Google now, where I usually put a question in to ask it anything, I use ChatGPT because it's just much better. So it's essentially replaced Google for me, which is probably what will happen one way or another at some point. So, for example, I was doing a project management course on the side of my job, and I was preparing for my assessment at the end, and I wasn't cheating, but I was basically asking it, what kind of things do I need to think about and discuss for the end of my assessment, and it was giving me, well, it basically did it for me, to be honest. It gave me loads of, like, absolutely brilliant information, which is completely relevant, but what that did was reaffirm to me that what I had sort of prepared in my head, the things I thought I knew, were right. So it kind of really confirmed that for me, so that was really helpful. And then the fourth point is seeking guidance or explanation on specific subjects. So that, again, relates to those sort of questions I was asking it about project management, quite complex stuff, which, you know, you couldn't get on Google, you couldn't find on Google. You might go down the rabbit hole and end up through various websites and things, but it just gave it to me straight away, and it was right there. And the final one is utilising the model for general conversation of interaction, which doesn't really make any sense, actually, reading that back. But basically what that was is I had to do a careers presentation for a bunch of primary school pupils recently, and I asked it to give me some themes and ways to engage children in what I do, and it gave me a load of really useful kind of information, like trying little quizzes and just really try and get them involved. You do little games with them, and actually that was really helpful and really worked really well. So it ended up going down quite well with the kids. So that was really useful. So that's just a few examples, but like I say, I use it all the time, and probably the most important thing that I've used it for was just today, when we were desperately trying to come up with our own wrestler names in the office, and I just couldn't think of anything for some people. So I asked ChatGPT. So I started off by asking it kind of what, I just put their name in of someone, and some of the best examples I got was for a lady called Natalie Falkus, who some of you might know. She came up as Nyx Fury because it combines a strong mystical element with a fierce persona. So just one example. Cassie, who sat over there, she was the Crimson Viper. Absolutely no reason why. But then I just thought I'm going to give it a bit more information about the people I'm asking about. So I then asked about Helen, who works in our team. She's got 3 children. So I said, she's a mother of 3. Can you give me a wrestler name for her? So she came up with the maternal mauler, which is just horrible. And then we had a mother of twins, Wendy. Hers was the twin tamer. Yeah, not the best. And Julie Lister, who described herself as sexy when I asked her how she wanted to be described, was the siren slayer. And we've got a guy who used to be a soldier as well, and his came out as the battle-hardened bruiser, which I quite liked. That was my favourite. So that's the most important stuff, really, that I've been using it for. But yeah, so thank you very much. Hope that helps. If I don't know if Ben's still there. I think he's gone now. So yeah, if anyone had any questions, don't know that I could answer them, but thanks anyway.